If you've been watching all my Taekwondo lessons so far, you'll know nearly all the techniques you need for Do Santo, so I don't have to explain them again. And I've listed all the lessons in the description below. So check through those and make sure you've learned each of those techniques before proceeding. But there are a few things you need to learn in addition to that. For example, a couple of ways of turning, a release motion, and how to punch in fast motion. So let's go through that now. In lesson number 22, I showed you how to do a straight fingertip thrust. And this makes movement number 6 of Do Santo. Straight after this, you need to do a release motion. Imagine somebody's grabbed your hand. You need to turn your hand, but you also need to push it forward. And you do this by pivoting with both feet, so you turn your body. This enables your hand to go forward. Okay? Don't bring it down, a lot of people do. Just forward like that. That's it. Now, it's like you've gone from walking stance to something like a sitting stance, but your heels are off the ground. So you do the release motion, then you keep the center of mass low as you go right round, and when you get to about this angle, you start winding up for the next technique, which is a back fist side strike. So you come up and down to perform the strike. And it's important that you turn to about here. If you turn too much, then you can't twist into the strike. You need to pivot a little bit to jerk the body to get a bit more power. Here's an example of the application of the technique. Practice this many times because it's a very tricky part of the pattern. Another thing to learn is how to do a spot turn. In movements number 3 and 11, you do a spot turn and move into an outer forearm high side block. Let me show you how you do this. The spot turn enables you to turn 180 degrees. You start by moving your front foot in. It can be done with the back foot, but in this case, it's done with the front foot. You step in where your heel line was and where it intersects the center line, there. Then you bring the weight onto that foot as you pivot and turn, and then you step into the walking stance, bringing the foot slightly back forward like that, in a slight curve. Okay? Then you perform the high side block. Now it's worth practicing this with a combination of a high side block and punch, because this is how it's done in Do Santo. So you go into the high side block, and then you do a punch, like that. Make sure you don't drop too low. I often see students trying to emphasize a sine wave, and they drop really low, squatting, coming up after. It should be very natural, just relax. So you don't need to drop too much. It's more of an ellipse, yeah? So you relax, come up, down, like this. Okay, so from there, relax, up, down. And then you do the spot turn, step, go into a neutral position, use a sine wave, and then again, punch. So practice that as a drill. Another combination worth practicing is a high wedging block followed by a front snap kick and an obverse reverse punch where the punches are done in fast motion. Let me explain what I mean by this. You do the high wedging block, which I showed you in the last lesson, and the front snap kick is done as a middle kick. So you've got to really lift the knee. But you've got to keep the arms in this position as you kick. And then you do 2 punches. Obverse punch means it's the same side as your front leg, and the reverse punch is opposite. But it's not done in normal motion. A normal motion would look like this, where you kick, you drop, relax, and drop. Fast motion, you don't have time to relax. So you go down, bounce up again, and straight down. It's very hard and sharp. Kick, down, down. And it's really worth emphasizing the pulling action to help speed up the punches. 2 common mistakes that I see with this is that people think it's fast motion, so you should do it as fast as possible. So sometimes I see this, kick, okay? Now it's fast motion, but not that fast. You always need to drop when you do a Taekwondo technique. And to understand why, you really need to watch the Taekwondo science videos on sine wave motion, where I'll explain why it's important to drop. Okay? So from here, kick, down, down. Another common mistake is where people bend the back leg and keep the heel off the ground when they do the first punch. kick, there, see? They end up like that, and then they do the second punch, which means their body doesn't raise, and they end up very flat. Like this, kick, down, down. See, it's very flat. You need to raise and drop, so avoid bending the knee. Make sure you drop both times. So practice this as a drill as well. Another technique worth practicing is a knife hand side strike in sitting stance. I showed you how to do a knife hand side strike in lesson number 7, but that was in L stance. In Do-san-tu, it's done in a sitting stance where you strike to the flank and you look to the side. But you also do a single step to move across. So you bring the feet together, transfer the weight to the other foot, and once you've got control of that foot, you wind up and execute the strike to the other side. So as you bring the feet together, transfer the weight, but the way this foot moves is in a special way. Let me explain. When you bring the feet together, transfer the weight, this foot won't move straight, but it will move in a curve. You'll go slightly forward and across, like that. And this is to enable your abdomen to move a bit better to do the strike. Okay, so practice it that way. And another thing is, sometimes I see students waiting to strike before they look to the side. They'll avoid looking at the opponent and then turn very suddenly at the end. This is very unnatural. If you've got an opponent there, you will look as soon as you can. So from there and look. It doesn't matter if you look before you strike. In fact, that makes sense. You do it that way rather than do the strike and see what you're hitting after. Finally, we're ready to practice Do-san-tu. There are 24 movements in this pattern, and you start from a parallel stance position. So from parallel stance, you do the combination we practiced earlier. You do a high side block, followed by a punch. Then you do the spot turn, high side block, followed by a punch. Then you move on to your front leg and pivot it 15 degrees so that it's ready to go into L stance. So there, and then perform a knife hand guarding block. Then you do the straight fingertip thrust, movement 6, followed by the release motion, pivot right round, back fist high side strike. Do another back fist high side strike, and then pivot 270 degrees, pivot right round, and then leave a little bit of a pivot at the end to do the high side block, where we repeat the combination we did earlier on at the beginning of the pattern, followed by a spot turn and another punch. Now you're going to have to pivot and come back, but you don't go back straight, you go at an angle of 15 degrees. So effectively, you're going to pivot about 80 degrees with that front foot, so that when you go into wedging block, you're at an angle of 15 degrees. And then you do the front kick, obverse reverse punch in fast motion. Then you go 15 degrees to the right, so effectively you're pivoting 30 degrees with the rear foot, do the high wedging block, followed by middle front kick, obverse reverse punch. Now when you come back, you go straight, so you need to go back and forward to do a rising block, followed by another rising block. Then you pivot your front foot 180 degrees, right round, lower yourself and balance on this leg so it's ready for sitting stance, then wind up for a knife hand strike, and then you do the single step across and strike to the other side. And you bring your right foot back to parallel ready stance. So here's an example of Do-san-tu. Do-san. In all 24 patterns in Taekwondo, you have to start and finish on the same spot. Now it's quite difficult to do this in Dosantul because most people end up a little bit short. And this is usually because they don't get the diagram right. So pay attention to the footwork, which I explained in detail today, especially when you're turning to do the wedging block. Make sure that the angle is 15 degrees, because any more than that, you'll end up short. Okay? So enjoy your practice, and hopefully I'll see you next time. See you then. Bye.